Hello, Bill.
Good afternoon, Matt.
Welcome to the DMZ, everybody.
It is Wednesday. It's always a little dangerous to talk on Wednesday. I mean, there's always a certain degree of risk in this business that events are going to get ahead of you. But the hot topic in Congress is what's going to happen with the bipartisan infrastructure bill and the broader Build Back Better reconciliation bill. And it's a real moving target.
Wait. So I was trying to figure out what BBB meant.
Yeah.
I know BIB,
right?
Bipartisan infrastructure bill, but BBB I couldn't figure out, but it's Build Back Better is what you're now calling the reconciliation $3.5 trillion soft human infrastructure bill.
I don't know if you noticed, Matt, I'm doing my best to coin the acronyms and the shorthand phrases. And especially when I see the media is struggling. I mean, I just saw in Politico the use of the term BIF for the infrastructure bill, and BIF is obsolete. BIF was bipartisan infrastructure framework. That was before it had translated into legislative language. It is now bipartisan infrastructure bill, and it should be BIB. And instead of talking about, I mean, you can't even shorthand say $3.5 trillion bill because we don't know if it's going to be $3.5 trillion. And the Democrats say Build Back Better. I understand that not everyone wants to use Democratic framing, but I think that will be the literal name of the bill. So we're on Twitter. We're trying to shorthand BIB and BBB strike me as the obvious ways to go. Let us set the precedent here in the DMZ.
Very appropriate place to do that in the DMZ. I'm down with BIB. No, I like it. What I like is settling on a unified thing to call this, because I've written about this and it's been very difficult to talk about the $3.5 trillion. So I like the fact that someone has taken the initiative and assigned acronyms. I wonder if you can get it to stick.
I mean, I'm not a hero, Matt. I'm just a working stiff trying to do my job.
To do the hard work that the elite members of the mainstream media won't do.
So we're talking on Wednesday. We're talking before there's a set of meetings in the White House with House and Senate moderates and House and Senate progressives. So we're handicapped that we don't know what is going to happen in those meetings, and not that I'm expecting there to be a breakthrough today. What's striking me about these meetings is, why aren't the moderates and the progressives in the room together? Why is Biden meeting with the moderates and the progressives separately? This is like Camp David, where Jimmy Carter to keep the Israelis and the Egyptians separate because the intel showed that they were going to talk past each other and ruin everything if they actually talk face to face.
What I'm waiting for is Biden to do one of those handshakes like this with AOC and Joe Manchin. That would be hilarious.
So I honestly, it is very hard to know what's going to happen here. We have, and mind you, it's not even just infrastructure votes scheduled for Monday, reconciliation, BBB, Build Back Better, still being hashed out. It's also September 30th, at least by September 30th, a vote to keep the government open, because the Democrats have not gotten the yearly appropriation bills passed. So they gotta do a so-called continuing resolution to keep the government open for, I think 3 months. I think it's early December. And Democrats want to tie on to that a suspension of the debt limit, which we're rapidly butting up against the debt ceiling. And if we don't lift it, the government defaults on the debt, which causes a global economic meltdown and a ruining of the full faith and credit of the American government. Even if you hiccup on that for a couple of days, like, you don't get that credit back. You lose basic confidence in your ability to meet your obligations. So this is all coming to a head at the same time.
Well, and because Democrats, though, control the Senate and the House, it should be no problem, right? They could just vote for this and we'll be done with it.
Well, this is McConnell. In one sense, McConnell has been warning Democrats for weeks, we're not going to help you here. You should come up with a plan to do this yourselves. I agree you should do it. Defaulting with it is bad, but we're not going to help you. So on one hand, he was like doing you a favor, telling you the deal. On the other hand, it is really a pernicious view of governing. Because the way the government's structured, it's not meant to be majority responsible for everything, minority responsible for nothing. That's not the way the game is played. It's not the way it should be played. The whole point is that we're all in this together, regardless of whether you win or lose. I mean, idiots like me that keep talking about keeping the filibuster, that's in part so the government isn't all for the winners and nothing for the losers. You don't lose your interest in governing just because you can't show in the election. You're still an American citizen. You're still part of the fabric of democracy. And McConnell, I think, is flying in the face of that.
All right, so pull the mask down on this, or whatever the expression is. Like, why Republicans are playing a game? What do they get out of it? What's the game? Why don't they want to be on the record supporting this? Why do they want to force Democrats to do it? What's the gamesmanship here?
The out party never likes to vote for raising of the debt limit because it is so easy to twist that vote into something negative, that you're doing something, you're being reckless with spending, you're being fiscally irresponsible if you're raising the debt limit. Now, everybody in Washington knows that the opposite is the case. The debt limit is simply covering the obligations you've already incurred. It is not encouraging new obligations. And it's just ensuring that we can meet the obligations that have been met. But everyone likes having that cheap shot card in their back pocket. And also, they don't want to get hit in primaries. Republican incumbents don't want to be hit by primary challenges saying, you guys help Democrats with all this spending by raising the debt limit. So no one wants to lay out an honest case for what we're actually doing here. But I think things are further complicated by the fact that Democrats are pursuing a very, very large spending agenda at the same time as this debt limit vote. If these things were farther apart, maybe it wouldn't be so touchy. But I've seen Republicans say, hey, this limit is going to cover some of this new spending. It's not just about the old spending. That is because what is on the table in the outgoing bill is not raising the debt limit to a specific number. It is suspending the debt limit, period. The debt limit hereby does not exist for a period of time. So it's fuzzy which spending is being, which debts are being covered by doing so. And so it's part of your other question, Matt, why can't Democrats do this themselves? Well, they technically can through a reconciliation bill, which is a filibuster-proof bill. But anything in such a bill has to be budgetary. We just had a ruling from the parliamentarian that Democrats could not put immigration reform in the reconciliation bill because it was not primarily budgetary. Democrats say, well, it has impact on the budget, and the parliamentarian says that's not good enough. The point of the provision has to be budgetary. So when it comes to debt limit, you can raise the debt limit by a specific amount in reconciliation because that is budgetary. But to suspend the debt limit is a policy change. And you can't do that in reconciliation.
Why are we suspending the debt limit?
Because, from my understanding, a good number of Democratic moderates don't want to be on the hook for voting for the debt limit, raise the debt limit to $2 gajillion. Because you could slap that in an attack ad pretty darn easily, especially when you're already about to vote for a multi-trillion-dollar bill. So suspending the debt limit is not as fat a target. And if they could do it that way, it would be with Republican votes, which gives them further political cover.
So if I'm playing devil's advocate, though, and let's concede up front that Republicans are hypocrites and that messing around with this is a dangerous game of chicken or whatever. But if I really sincerely care about reining in government spending, this doesn't, I mean, I understand why there would be a rationale for doing what Republicans are doing right now if I cared about not spending trillions of dollars.
I mean, if Republicans cared about reining in spending, then when they had a trifecta in 2017, 2018, they would have cut spending instead of cutting taxes without any spending offsets. They have incurred a great amount of debt, which makes you hit the debt ceiling even faster.
Sure, but Democrats didn't have to suspend the debt ceiling, as you're saying that they're trying to do, right? They could just raise it. They're trying to change the policy.
Well, temporarily. And look, I heard Congressman John Yarmouth, who's the budget chair for the Democrats in the House, he said, let's just raise the debt limit to $1 gajillion ourselves and be done with this. So you raise it to a level where you will never, ever, ever hit it. And we'll stop having these ridiculous games. And if you did suspend it, it would be the same effect. But suspending requires bipartisan agreement, which we're not going to get. And to do it Democrats only creates a certain amount of political risk for certain Democrats. That's why it's not happening.
It also really does feel like, again, the stakes are so high, but you understand why Republicans would want to play this game. I mean, Democrats are going to get blamed because they have the votes. And they're the ones trying to change the policy, and they're also trying to spend at the same time, trillions of dollars. It does seem like the Republicans are playing a much better hand than they normally are when they do this sort of, gamesmanship.
Well, I'll give them this much credit. I think political parties should think a few steps ahead. It's not in anybody's interest to see the full faith and credit of America go down in flames. If you think, well, I'm going to sink the global economy so I can win the midterm, I don't think you're thinking far enough ahead in terms of what is good for you. Having said that, I do think Republicans can make a reasonable calculation that, hey, if Democrats can't get their act together to do this themselves and have to beg for our votes, then we're going to get something out of it. We can they're not going to get our votes for nothing. We'll get a concession out of them, whatever that concession is. So I might as well sit tight and see if they have to come to me, and then we can bargain. I'm not going to give away something for free. That calculation I understand.
Yeah. Well, it is interesting. It's been quite a September, and we've got, as you said, like next week, a couple of big deadlines and dates. But Bill, there's another big date coming up, and that's your birthday. It's coming up. It happens this time every year. Yeah. And I always like to take a little time to talk about the special, not only are you great at these acronyms, BBB, BIB, but you have invented a way of celebrating your birthday, which I admire because it forces people to bend to your will and to comply with your demands. Talk about what you do and what you're doing this year.
Just like we talked, it's all about leverage, Matt. You gotta use the leverage when you have it. Birthday is your day of leverage. The birthday plan, and I recommend, there's no copyright on it. You feel free to steal it and copy it and bend your friends to your will. Instead of throwing a party, parties are so annoying. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of coordination.
And you have to do the work.
You have to do the work.
The onus is on.
You have to do the work to put the party together. You got to do the work at the party. You got to talk, it's all chit chatty, small talk, and it's kind of stressful, and you don't get to sit down and enjoy yourself. I don't see the point myself. If you like, some people like doing that sort of thing. If you do what you like is my motto. But if you're the kind of person that says, this is so exhausting, why am I doing this? Don't do it. Instead, say, what are all the things that I like to do that I don't get a chance to do most of the year? And say, look, here is a schedule for the day or the weekend. I'm going to do these 5 things at these times. Friends, if you want to join me for A, B, C, D, or E, you are welcome. If you don't want to, no problem. We're still friends, but I am going to do these things at these times.
Yeah. So it could be at 7:30 a.m. Friday morning, I'll be at Bob Evans having breakfast. At 2 p.m. Friday afternoon, I'll be at Terrace Lanes bowling. I'll be at the bar at 5 o'clock. Whoever wants to buy me gins and tonics, show up. And that's how it goes.
Exactly. So that is always the plug for, the birthday life hack. Well, I do want to get back to Congress, though. Okay.
No. Before we get back to Congress, I have one more question.
Yeah.
You're wearing a hat that says the Petroleum Museum.
Yes.
What the hell is the Petroleum Museum?
Can't believe I haven't visited the Petroleum Museum. One of my road trips many years ago, I drove through Texas, hit Midland, Texas, very famous spot for the Bush family. It is the home of the Petroleum Museum, and George H.W. Bush is honored in the Petroleum Museum Hall of Fame. And so if you want to learn all there is to know about the extraction of petroleum, Midland, Texas is the place to be.
Wow. I will not do that. I am hoping, I have to tell you, Bill, I'm planning a trip to California next year if all goes well.
North or south?
And I'm planning to take
or central.
The Reagan Library. So
very nice.
I'll keep you posted.
I would that would be a fun place to visit. I've never been. I could do Reagan and Nixon.
I was there, I've been to both. I've been to the Reagan Library and I've been to the Nixon. The Nixon Library is great. It's actually the birthplace, burial, and library for Nixon.
Does Ford have a library out there?
Ford's is probably in Michigan, right?
I mean, I know he's from Michigan, but I think he was living in Southern California in his last days. So I didn't know where his site was.
No, but I can recommend Reagan and Nixon libraries. And
now I did a radio show yesterday, the Rick Smith Show, and we're talking about the new revelations in the Bob Woodward book and Trump conspiring to overthrow the election and how Mike Pence didn't play along. I happen to be wearing my Dan Quayle Vice Presidential Museum T-shirt, which I have managed to keep in good condition for over 20 years. You know, many of my T-shirt artifacts have disintegrated by now, but the Dan Quayle T-shirt was a high quality T-shirt and is still
gaining acceptance in the polls.
And so Dan Quayle plays this role in the Woodward book where he's the one telling Mike Pence, you don't have the power. You have to follow the Constitution. And so I can wear my Dan Quayle shirt with more pride than I have been over the past 3 decades.
Yeah, I think he rose to the occasion. Yeah, I assume the museum's in Indiana.
Yeah, it's in Huntington, Indiana, which is his hometown. And when I was there, which was many, many years ago, I think it's no longer called the museum. I think it's called the Dan Quayle Center or something or other. But when I was there, it was a 2-floor building. Huntington's not a big town. The first floor was a rotating exhibit of other non-Quayle things, and the top floor was all the Quayle stuff. And it was a time when they were featuring the entries of the local 3rd grade essay contest, in which everyone had to answer the question, why I want to grow up to be like Dan Quayle, which was a fascinating exercise in hometown propaganda.
Amazingly, I feel like you told this story very recently on this show.
It's very possible. I love the story.
So I'll retell I've never met Dan Quayle, I don't think. I met Ben Quayle. I had lunch with Ben Quayle in Arizona when he was running for Congress. And I met him, and I think he was a little standoffish until he saw I was wearing a Vineyard Vines polo. And then he knew that I could be trusted, and he told me as much. So So dress preppy, and it pays. It pays off. It earns trust.
I'm gonna tell you one more completely. I don't even know if I can say it's tangential. Just go apropos of nothing. In Northampton last week, I saw the inaugural stop of the Al Franken comedy tour.
Oh, that's cool.
Very first stop on the tour, and I believe it's coming to Washington in November. October, November. And I recommend, I think as the first stop on the tour, it was a little, I think he's workshopping some stuff. Yeah. It's not super tight.
They always, it gets fine tuned as they go.
But I don't want to give, anything away. But I want to say this much. Number one, the best part of the tour, best part of the show is stories like in the Senate cloakroom and stories from the campaign trail. And I don't know if these are things that were in. I know he wrote a book right before he got ousted. I don't know if these were in. I've not read that book. I don't know if these were in the book or not. But they were new to me at least, and I thought those were fun.
Yeah.
And it was interesting because the show is not. Okay, I'll say one thing first. He has one bit where he lightly touches on the ousting. And it was one really funny, but also it could have gone even farther. And I wonder if he would take it farther because it was a good setup that he kind of cut off quickly. And it could definitely be mined for more if he wanted to.
Does it involve Kirsten Gillibrand?
I'll say she's not mentioned. She's not mentioned. Okay. She's not singled out. But it definitely conveys that he's not happy how things turned out for him. And so they get to the other thing I want to say is that it's not altogether funny all the time. There are serious parts. And he made a comment before he came to Northampton to the local papers that he hadn't ruled out running for office again. And so it did make me think like how much of this is fun, how much of this is he might, jump back in the arena if the opportunity presented itself.
I'm sure people who go to see him go there for a combination of comedy and politics and just to be entertained. Mm-hmm. By the way, I finished the Norm Macdonald audiobook.
Yeah.
Which is bizarre. It's very good. It's supposed to be a memoir, but there's no way. I mean, it's very surreal and bizarre. But the one thing I'll say about it, the thing that really hit me the most is how he talks about like what it was like being on the edge of fame like 30 years ago and now being not a nobody, but sort of being recognized occasionally. But generally it's like the most like he knew when he's writing this book, he knew he'll never do anything for the rest of his life that will top being on Saturday Night Live. Mm-hmm. And so like, no, I have not had the same experience as Norm Macdonald, either as being as famous as him or falling as far as him. But, there was a time like a few years ago when I used to be on CNN, like prime time a lot. Mm-hmm. And I used to get recognized a lot. And now I can't get you to return my calls. So the show, that's why I have to tell you all these stories now.
I hope you're not like calling Anderson Cooper at 2:00 in the morning saying, "Hey, great show, buddy."
Yeah.
Well, I'm still watching. I love what you're doing.
I could just identify a smidge with Norm, but I think that was the part. If you listen to the audiobook, and it's definitely it's weird, but it's worth listening to. But he's really being honest about like what it's like to be somebody who used to be. I mean, when he made that movie Dirty Work, like in like '98 or something. Mm-hmm. I mean, that movie's got like Chevy Chase and Don Rickles and Chris Farley in it. And he was like very, good friends with like Adam Sandler. I mean, Norm Macdonald in '98 was, a pretty big deal. And it is just, it's interesting to hear somebody talk about what it's like to have like once been a big deal and now, and I don't know if this is true because you can't tell what's true in the book and what's not, but he says like when he would go out, he wears like a Saturday Night Live jacket and a Dirty Work hat. presumably to be recognized like, at diners or whatever. So anyway, I'm not to that level yet, Bill.
You totally derailed me like 20 minutes ago talking about infrastructure and reconciliation. So I'm going to go back to that now.
Okay. I know.
So that vote for the infrastructure bill is set for Monday. And this was the outgrowth of the deal that a group of House moderates struck with Pelosi last month. They wanted to delink the two bills, the infrastructure bill and the Build Back Better bill. Progressives want it linked because they think if they pass infrastructure first, then moderates have all the leverage over the reconciliation bill and could even choose not to vote for it at all. And so they have said, well, we're not going to vote for the infrastructure bill until the reconciliation bill clears the Senate. And Pelosi's plan has been to pass a version of the House that would clear the Senate as is and not need further changes. And the chair of the Progressive Caucus, Pramila Jayapal, is saying that we have more than half of our caucus prepared to do this. That would be 48, 49 people. But we don't have 48, 49 people named, although they've been, both Jayapal and AFC have repeatedly said, you don't believe us, try us, we're not bluffing. They're flexing as much as one could possibly flex. But there is a whip count that's done by three progressive outlets, the American Prospect, the Intercept, and the Daily Poster. I checked this morning. Their whip count's at 16. They put out a question.
Wait, 16 people who would not vote
Correct.
For the infrastructure bill.
Actually, the way it was worded in their whip count was, would you vote for the infrastructure bill before reconciliation passed the House? And they've gotten 16 saying, no, we would not, at that point. So it's a little different than past the Senate, but splitting hairs here. We still don't know for a hard fact how many Democrats would walk. However, we have only 2 Republicans on record saying they would vote for it. So the same rule applies. Brian Fitzpatrick is the chair of the Problem Solvers Caucus. There are 29 Republicans in the Problem Solvers Caucus. And Patrick has said, well, I think we had over 40 before, but now I'm not so sure. I'm still working at it. Probably different Republicans have said anonymously different things. Some say as low as 8, some say as many as 36. Fitzpatrick just yesterday or Monday said, I've had some surprising conversations. So someone I thought was going to be no is leaning yes. So there may be surprises here. So it's a black box right now. What's actually going to happen? I think, the preponderance of evidence get hard names. I got 16 hard no Democrats and 2 hard yes Republicans in and of itself suggests progressives would be able to stop the bill. We don't know yet. Again, Biden's meeting with these folks in a matter of hours. Where's he going to lean here? Is he going to push them to vote yes or not? Is Pelosi going to whip for this or not? Those things are a little uncertain. Pelosi's team is saying, we're scheduling this bill and want Democrats to vote for it. But they haven't really done the hard press yet, and we don't know if they will or not. So
let's just, not to put too fine a point on this, but this is bad for Democrats. So maybe it all comes together, but this is not where you want to be if you are Joe Biden, if you are Nancy Pelosi. There is a chance that they get nothing out of this. Nothing.
Well, there's the long-term risk of getting nothing, period, which I still do not think what's going to happen. I just think there's too much at stake. It's not really any Democrat's interest to sink everything. If Biden's agenda totally stalls,
somebody has to swerve. It's a game of chicken, right? Somebody has to swerve, and who wants to show that they're not tough enough to stick to their guns? And in the Senate, on the moderate side, in the Senate, right? It only takes one stubborn person.
Well,
like if Joe Manchin or Sinema just is super stubborn, and even if they're completely acting irrationally, they could tank that.
Well,
and then,
Sinema has said this much. I mean, this is, progressives felt if we hold Bibb hostage, then we will have better leverage for BBB. And then Sinema has said, I'm not letting you get away with that. If you tank Bibb, then you don't get my vote for BBB and you get nothing. So we're now in a leverage arms race where that should, if we're following the mutually assured destruction principle, everyone should back away from the ledge and get back to the bargaining table soon. But as far as what's been stated for the record, if everyone follows through on their threats, you would have mutually assured destruction and you would get nothing.
And this is no longer even about the bills. Like at some point, this becomes about demonstrating toughness, about your own identity, about not being taken advantage of. What has to happen is find a way for someone to save face. I mean, that's what Nancy Pelosi did when she kicked it to this September 27th date. But I don't know how they're going to like rectify this situation. Like basically someone has to back down. But what if neither side is willing? Like what if they're like, no, I'm not backing down.
I mean, if neither side's winning, then they get nothing. I mean, then you have a Democrats disarray narrative that is totally disastrous for the party. You can't totally discount the possibility, but it would seem to me, no, it's really not in anybody's interest to let that happen. But we are at a point where, Democrats are starting to lose the plot. When all the coverage is about these leverage games, you're not talking about what these bills are supposed to do for the average American. And I'm not even sure the parties themselves are keeping in mind what they're trying to accomplish here. I mean, if progressives succeed in blocking infrastructure, but moderates still retain the leverage to knock down BBB to 2.5 and not 3.5 trillion, what have you actually accomplished with the linkage?
Let's go back, though. Isn't the original sin here linkage? Like, I mean, I remember being outraged when Biden linked them. Like, why can't we just have a bipartisan infrastructure bill that like builds roads and hospitals and airports and bridges? Why can't we just do that and just do that? And then if the progressives and the left wants to pass some big thing, they could try to do that on their own. Like, why can't we actually just do, like, I think the original sin was the linkage. And who started that? Why did that happen? That seems to be like the Democrats being like too cute by half, trying to have their cake and eat it too. And Biden should have wouldn't Biden be better off getting to say, I did a bipartisan infrastructure bill?
Actually, I wanted yesterday to go back. It's amazing what you forget so quickly.
Big time, yeah.
I was trying to remember who said what about linkage before Biden made his comment about the bills have to be in tandem. Because Biden said that the day the Senate group of 10 announced their framework. That was in late June. They announced their framework, and then like an hour later, Biden says they have to be in tandem.
And that was people were like, what? We didn't sign on for this.
Well, so the moderates said that, and the Republicans involved in the deal said that, whereas the progressives, Nancy Pelosi, said, hell yeah. But then Biden walked that back, at least partially, which left things kind of murky. So there was a column yesterday by Greg Sargent of the Washington Post that was really trying to blame the moderates for blowing up the agreement, blowing up the two-track agreement. And I just didn't think that was accurate. There never was a two-track agreement that they signed on to. There's a two-track plan that Biden, Pelosi, and Schumer would like to execute. But Manchin and company never said, our view of two-track is that they literally happen at the same time, or that reconciliation before infrastructure.
Isn't the fundamental problem Democrats do not want to do a vote on climate change because they don't think they're going to win it. They don't want to do like all these things in the progressive wish list, they don't want to take the time and energy to try to win the national conversation on and win the vote, because it takes a lot of time, and they're not even their views aren't terribly popular in many cases. And so they try to do a quick fix and tie it all together and call it infrastructure, because that sounds nice. And isn't that the fundamental like thing that got us to where we are now? Biden might get nothing.
I don't think that's an quite accurate description of the state of play, because a good number of these moderates are perfectly fine with climate stuff. I mean, maybe not, they may be quibbling on the specifics, but you had some of the House moderates saying to Pelosi, this all should be paid for except for climate measures, because that's an urgent matter, and we're not even factoring in the external costs of what it would like to not do climate measures. So let's separate that out. Now, of course, Manchin is not one of those moderates. You know, Manchin obviously has a very different take on the climate stuff than some of the other moderates do. The thing about the moderates is they don't all have the same concerns. They all have different sets of concerns, often tied to their regional circumstances. And so it's a real, 12-dimensional chess game trying to make it all fit. And I think the bigger issue here, to answer the question, why can't they just do hard infrastructure first? There's just a fundamental lack of trust between the Democratic progressives, particularly on the squad side of the pond, and the moderates. When you have Kirsten Sinema saying, so I tweeted out just a quote from the Politico article saying that Sinema was prepared to vote no on reconciliation. I wasn't putting my own thoughts into it. I was just quoting the article. AOC quote tweeted my tweet and basically accused Sinema of, going back on the deal. And just my reaction was, this is not somebody trying to win Sinema over. This is someone trying to humiliate Sinema in the public square. And maybe they're thinking of doing it in a strategic sense, that humiliation is the way to get her to crack. But I just think it speaks to just a deep level of mistrust between these two camps. Because otherwise, you would pass one, then the next, you just know the next one's coming, and we'll work that out because we're on the same team here. They don't believe they're on the same team. They think they can only get the second piece of this by forcing them to. They think so this is going to be a very weird comparison, and it's not analogous, but I remember, after 9/11, and then it was like, well, you know what we have to do next, right? We have to invade Iraq. And I remember like, well, you guys are my team and you know a lot more about this than I do, so sure, but this feels like a non sequitur to me. Like, I don't quite understand why the next logical step. And like, that's how this feels. Like, I don't get what BBB has to do with BIB. I don't get linking them. I don't like, and just because you're afraid that if you pass A, you won't get to pass B, you could say that about anything. Like, why not come up with some elaborate plan where you can't do anything unless we also obey? Like, linking, do you get my point? It seems like a weird thing that we just accepted. Like, oh, I guess they're going to try to do them in tandem and link them without ever going like, that's a weird idea. Why would they do that? It doesn't make sense. But okay, like maybe they're the smart people. Maybe they know what they're doing. Maybe it'll all work out. And now here we are in something that could end up being a quagmire, quite frankly. Well, I think when Biden first laid this all out, there was narrative structure to it. First was the American Rescue Plan, which was the COVID relief bill. Then there was the American Jobs Plan, the American Families Plan. It was all supposed to be part of a succession of events that all fit a broader narrative trying to make our economy work better for the average middle-class family and to expand the middle class. And so all the things that are obstacles to making the economy work for the average person, we're going to address. Whether it is making sure that our roads and bridges are functioning and we're creating jobs, whether it's making sure we have clean water, making sure we have broadband for our homes and our businesses, making sure that We have healthcare, so healthcare is not a drag on our ability to find and keep work. So elder care is taken care of, so that's not a financial drain on families taking care of their aging parents. Universal preschool, free community college. It's also a part of making the economy work for the average family. I think that narrative structure has degraded as we've talked about leverage and sequencing and linkage.
Yeah. But it was
just so we ties one point off. Yeah. And so I think what is coming through is the driving force is less. These are all parts of a whole for making the economy work better. It feels more like we're on the clock here as Democrats in a narrow majority. We have to get past what we can get done as soon as we possibly can.
But I just think the whole premise of it fitting into a narrative was always bogus. I mean, they're basically saying everything we want to do, everything the left wants to do, we're going to call infrastructure. I mean, I could say
they're not even doing that anymore. Bill, they've stopped trying to do that.
I could say we're going to make sure that taxes are low so that families can keep more of what they earn so that doesn't interfere with their living the American dream.
That's what Republicans do.
Sure that every family is assigned, an AK-47 so that they can protect their family and preserve the American dream. I mean, it's like, okay, everything we like, we're going to say is important and part of this plan.
That was pretty good. I'll give you that. But
take that, Norm Macdonald.
Look, I think Democrats have to do a better job explaining the package. The polling for the package actually polls pretty well, but I feel like no one really knows what's in the package yet. Of course, it's not even fully drafted yet. So it's hard to message. It's hard to communicate what you're doing when you as a party don't agree on what you're doing. They haven't achieved that level of consensus yet.
All right, but I want to go to, you were talking about Dems in disarray. And I know that that's sort of like a cliche, but it could also be true. Like, just because it's a cliche doesn't mean, we are now, I think you said, Bill, so for people who don't know, you were on my podcast on Monday. And people should go listen to it if they really like the wonkery, because unlike the DMZ, ironically on Matt Lewis in the News, Matt Lewis doesn't talk much. I talk like 50% here in the DMZ. I would say on that podcast, you talk 90% of the time. And I just wanted you to but by design, I wanted you to just drop knowledge. And I would just tell us about this. And you would tell us. And I think you mentioned on that podcast, the whole Dems in disarray thing. And it is a cliche. But as I think you said on the podcast, Joe Biden hasn't had a good news headline in 2 months. You
said 43 in the Gallup poll. Well, and look, if next week...
It ain't just the fact that he may end up with 0 legislative accomplishments now, but there's a lot of stuff happening.
Well, let's put aside what might happen in the long term, because that obviously is very hard to know. It's not implausible that next week, Democrats will fail to pass the infrastructure bill. They'll fail to pass the bill to keep the government open. And so by October 1st, that's Friday, right? Potentially by Friday, the government could be shut down. The Highway Trust Fund will no longer be authorized. And so federal spending on roads and bridges will be disrupted. It doesn't automatically stop all projects, like that. But over time, you might start seeing projects get disrupted. And, there's going to be a lot of people saying Democrats in disarray if that is what we're at the end of the week. Now, I saw some back and forth on Twitter where I think one guy was arguing to me, sort of, so what about the short term? Don't make a bad policy decision for a short term poll bump if it's going to leave you with a far weaker set of policies at the end of the day. So I suppose it is possible that Biden will think, I can suffer, a few days just of a shutdown. We'll get there at the end of the day. Or he might say, look, I'm in a jam here. I need a good headline.
But let's put it in context, Bill. The Afghanistan withdrawal was a disaster. We just freaking, droned a family, including 7 children. We've got 12 to 15,000 help me out, Haitians. We've got 12 to 15,000 Haitians in Del Rio, Texas, under a bridge, being chased around by border security on horses. I mean, this is a rough couple of weeks here for Joe Biden.
Yeah. And I mean, we'll know what Biden's plan is soon enough. I would have thought, knowing Biden's history as a bipartisan creature, as a guy who likes to get deals done, and a guy who has probably itching for a win, probably doesn't like shutdowns and disruptions, would be inclined to say, hey, Democrats, I need you to vote for this. We're in trouble here. I'm in trouble. You're in trouble. You got to have some trust and faith that we're going to get the reconciliation bill done, in short order. But this bill is in hand and we got to get it done now. I can't be a total mind meld and know that's exactly going to happen, because he might decide, otherwise. But that strikes me as in line with his history.
Well, I think that what we have here is game theory at play as well. Remember, and when I wrote my book, Too Dumb to Fail, I talked all about the tragedy of the commons and different collective action problem and all that. And that's kind of what Democrats have now, right? I mean, if you're AOC and the Squad and the progressives, do you care more about protecting Joe Biden's legacy, or do you care more about setting a marker that when if you don't play ball with us, we're not going to play ball with you? I think probably the latter. And so this could get dicey. I mean, in the olden days, like a president would lean on somebody and they would end up caving because they wouldn't get they'd get kicked off their committee or what. But I don't see AOC backing down over something like this.
Well, I mean, I think AOC and other Squad members, they have been waiting for this moment. I mean, you go back and look at interviews AOC gave before she was even sworn in. She has wanted progressives to function more like the House Freedom Caucus, to not do the demands of House leadership, to take the marbles and go home and prove you're willing to walk away as a way to gain leverage. To say, we may not be in the middle of the caucus, we may be on the left of the caucus, but you need us, and therefore you have to do things our way. They've wanted to play that game for a long time, and this is their best shot to do it. And it may be that they have the numbers to do that to some degree.
I just can't imagine being like, you see those dysfunctional, crazy people over there? Let's be like them. Let's do that. Let's do what the Republicans did, because look how well it's worked out for them. And in a way, it has worked out well. That's the problem.
The thing is, the only way that the Squad is not going to be able to exercise that leverage is if Republicans don't let her. You have 29 Republicans in the Problem Solvers Caucus, which may or may not be enough to offset what the progressives have. Again, we don't know what the progressives have. But you have a Problem Solvers Caucus who supposedly exist to solve problems. They exist to do bipartisan legislation. They came out in July when the Senate deal was done and said, we support this deal. This tracks what we had proposed separately, and it deserves a standalone vote. Now it has a standalone vote. Here it is on Monday. And the chair of the Problem Solvers Caucus is saying, well, we might not have the numbers because some of our people don't want this to be linked to reconciliation. The way it's linked to reconciliation is if Republicans join AOC and vote with her to link them by voting no on the bill on Monday. If they want it delinked, you vote yes. with the other Democrats. Politico just had a playbook entry that said, Fitzpatrick has only been co-chair of this thing for this past year, and he has not had the experience of whipping. And so we all whipping and head counting. It's harder than it looks. It's hard to get people to commit to things. I mean, and look, Jayapal on the progressive side keeps saying that she has, more than half of her 96-member caucus, but only 16 are on the record. It's one thing to have a private conversation with somebody and say, oh yeah, I'm going to vote with you. You got it. Sure, I'm there. And then, but if you don't go public, what does that really mean? To secure those commitments is a skill that neither Jayapal or Fitzpatrick have proven records of. Maybe one is intrinsically better than the other. As it stands, Jayapal is sort of acting more confident than Fitzpatrick is. But we just don't know. And just from my perspective, if I want to be a Republican problem solver, and I understand plenty of progressives like, don't be an idiot, Bill. Obviously, they don't really care about solving problems. They're just total phony nonsense. And look, if they can't vote for this thing, that's pretty much validated that argument. But you have made a decision to join a group called the Problem Solvers Caucus, presumably because you want to be seen as a bipartisan problem solver. Well, here's your chance, buddy. If you don't do it, you're gonna look like a joke, and everything that the character has been put upon you is going to be validated if you don't take this step and actually vote for this thing.
But in fairness to them, Democrats have created a weird scenario now, right? So if I'm a center-right person and I vote at this point for the bipartisan infrastructure bill and it passes, that unlocks the $3.5 trillion BBB to be pushed through via reconciliation. So in a sense, I am complicit in passing the $3.5 trillion bill that I don't believe in because I voted for. But
it hasn't unlocked anything. What unlocks reconciliation is the passage of the budget resolution, which has already happened. To vote on the infrastructure bill on Monday is the vote on the infrastructure bill. Period.
It unlocks it, right? Because I'm trying to think through what's contingent on it, right? Okay, so cinema would then be so if this thing passes, it unleashes cinema
to vote for something, but she hasn't. No one. This is what's sticking the progressives' craw. Nobody on the moderate side has said, "I will vote for reconciliation if the infrastructure bill is passed," and they don't say that because there is no infrastructure. There is no reconciliation bill yet. It doesn't exist. There's no final bill, so they can't promise to vote for something that isn't written yet. They're still negotiating what that bill is.
Right. But let me just play through by linking this, Democrats have created these weird calculations, right? But like, if I'm a Republican and I vote for this, that means other Democrats don't have to, which means it's now going to pass, which means Democrats in the House didn't block it. And if Democrats in the House didn't block it, cinema is no longer obliged to try to block BBB. So I am in some weird way, in a ricochet sort of manner, like somehow complicit. Do you see what I'm saying?
Well, here's the thing. Republicans don't have the power in and of themselves to kill reconciliation. If Democrats want to pass reconciliation, they will pass reconciliation. They have the votes to do that, so long as they agree amongst themselves. So Republicans, I don't think, should look at it in terms of what can I do to kill reconciliation, because they can't ultimately control that. They might say to themselves, well, Sinema said that if they kill the infrastructure, she won't vote for reconciliation. So if I vote against it, I'll kill them both. Well, Sinema might then conclude a month later, well, that's not going to work out. I can't really hold to that position because it's going to drag us all down to the abyss. And so essentially by Republicans trying to induce Democrats in disarray, they may do the opposite. They may push them into array because that is the logical place to go if there's no other recourse to get anything passed.
You could be right. However, they really seem content on fighting. The Democrats really seem content on fighting each other. I think it's unlikely that Republicans would make Sinema and AOC would bring them together. It doesn't seem likely.
I mean, by voting for the House bill, they're driving Sinema and AOC apart. They're delivering a loss to the squad. Now, there likely will be some sort of reconciliation bill, but the moderates would clearly have the means to dictate the terms of it. So now maybe Republicans think that's not good enough because I'm still betting a bill I don't like. But again, they can't ultimately control it either way. They do have the ability to get this bill passed and get credit for roads, bridges, water, broadband that comes to their districts and states. Say, we did this. We weren't obstructionists. We played team ball for the good of the country. And what Democrats did outside of that was our hands had nothing to do with it, and we're going to fight that every step of the way. And knowing that in likelihood what's going to be produced will be less than what progressives ideally want, and they can take some quiet credit for that.
Well, I mean, I'm making an argument that there's a, reasonable philosophical reason for this, but it probably more likely is the gamesmanship and, never interfere with your opponent when he's in the process of committing suicide. It's like the Democrats are in disarray. Why would I want to interfere and save them? Now, I get saving them from the debt ceiling thing or from the fiscal cliff, but, to spend money on infrastructure, why would I want to even if I kind of nominally supported the bipartisan infrastructure bill, why would I want to interfere and save them when they're in the process of destroying themselves?
Well, yeah, I just don't think your Democrats control their own destiny. Republicans don't have the power to ensure whether they're in array or disarray. There's the possibility they vote no and put Democrats in greater array and do bigger things that maybe people actually like and might help them win a unprecedented, midterm for a president's party. That is a possible outcome here if Republicans vote no. So because people might like what's being sold. I would argue Republicans control what you can control. I mean, look, if you don't like spending money on infrastructure, then don't vote for it. But clearly, some Republicans do want to do that. Do think this is within the proper parameters of governance and like to be able to tell people at home, I did this for you. Some Democrats say they'll take credit anyway. They'll just show up with the ribbon cutting even though they didn't vote for it. But I don't think that's that easy a play, particularly in a swing area where someone you can get called on.
Didn't Mitch McConnell do that recently?
Well, McConnell was honest. McConnell was the one saying we did not vote for this. He was one who was not BSing it. Other Republicans have BS'd it in the past, but McConnell was not one of them.
All right. Well, let me make a plug. If people want to celebrate Bill Scher's birthday, they can either show up at Terrace Lanes Bowling at 2 p.m. on Thursday, or they could go to patreon.com/Bill Scher and, support his fine work with the podcasting and the commentary and the writing and all that good stuff. and then you'll be invited on our DM Zoom call, which is fast approaching.
We should do one this Friday, right?
I think we will. Yeah.
All right.
I think we will. So do that. What else do you want to plug, Bill?
So I have a piece in the month. I got two pieces in the monthly. I think the second one just went up. So one is unrelated to Washington. Nick Kristof, the New York Times columnist, is considering a run for governor of Oregon. And I made a strong recommendation that he not do that and run for city council or mayor, or where he is in Oregon, he could actually run for the Yamhill County Board of Commissioners. Actually, I think might be the most tempting spot for him. One, because I think it's hard to be a good governor without having that local experience and learning how the levers of government really work. It's one thing to talk about from the columnist perspective, another thing to actually do it. And these local positions, because there's such a paucity of people that run for these jobs that it's not that hard to get something. Even if he couldn't win an election, there's appointed positions in county government that he could probably get his hands on. Cause usually people are like begging people, hey, will you please sit on this planning board seat? So I made a strong case for that.
I get going from being a New York Times columnist to being governor of Oregon. I get that. Could you keep your columnist gig and be a local politician in Oregon?
I wrote that he should. My editor said, maybe the Times won't allow for that, so we got to put a caveat there. But whether it was at the Times or whether it was like through a Substack thing or whatnot, I think he would have a perch that he could write about what it's like to be in municipal or county government and try to popularize it. Because, again, people don't run for these things. The majority of mayor's positions are uncontested in the country. These are thankless jobs nobody wants.
And I bet you could even write a book about the experience.
Oh, I'm sure you absolutely could.
It's a great idea.
So that's what I think you should do. And secondly, for reconciliation that hasn't got as much attention with all this other drama going on is the parliamentarian struck down the Democrats' attempt to include immigration reform in reconciliation. And it was a really interesting opinion that the parliamentarian wrote. We don't usually get to see parliamentarian opinions. I mean, it's almost like a Supreme Court ruling, which drives some people on the left insane. Like, why the hell does the parliamentarian have this power to create these precedents? And technically speaking, the parliamentarian can be overruled, though you have to need the votes to do it. But I argued in the piece that the parliamentarian made a very good case why Democrats, that she was saving Democrats from themselves by doing this. Because if you can liberalize immigration policy and reconciliation, you can shrink immigration policy and reconciliation to a point where Republicans, if they have the next trifecta, could literally take away people's legal immigration status and send them home.
Wow. Wow.
And sometimes Democrats talk about, we should just be able to pass things that are popular. We should not be thwarted by a minority. And look, if we pass something and the Republic doesn't like it and they vote us out, well, so be it. But Republicans, we're going to pass popular stuff. Republicans won't have the spine to repeal it because people will like it. And the point that I make here is, let's say for argument's sake, you pass, checks for families through reconciliation. Everyone gets $500, every month. People like that. Put the political hyperbole aside. Let's just assume for a sake of argument that people like that. Okay, it's going to a lot of people. Immigration policy is not for everybody. That is not a policy written for majoritarian purposes. It is to help a minority get rights and to get a better life for themselves. There's lots of things that progressives want to do that are not for majority purposes because they care about minority rights. And those are the things that are being most vulnerable in a world where, when the pendulum swings and it's straight majority rule all the time, those things can get knocked out, real fast. And if you're a immigrant with currently legal resident status today, and you may not have it tomorrow, that's a very unsettling place to be in. We already know how tough it was for dreamers to be in this kind of circumstance. Now you're potentially expanding the pool of people, undocumented or documented, who don't know where they stand, election to election. I don't think that's a tenable place that we want to be in. And I think the parliamentarian made that point very, very, very succinctly in the ruling.
Very cool. So I interviewed George Will.
Wow.
Where we argued about denim. And I interviewed David Frum, where he recommended that Trump supporters go for a walk and eat more salmon.
So George Will's argument is that people should not wear denim?
He hates the fact he'll say, like, if you go to the airport, you'll see like a kid wearing blue jeans, and then his like 50-year-old dad will be wearing blue jeans and sneakers. And George Will feels that this is indicative of a society where men do not grow up and behave and act and dress like men.
This is not even not even the office. This is on the airplane. He wants you to be dressed to the nines on the airplane.
I don't think it's asking too much to wear a blazer, Bill.
Now, the proper retort is that, George Will, you look like a 5-year-old when you wear bow ties, so you have no business talking about people growing up.
That would have been the comeback I should have gone to. But what I would write, and 2 very good interviews, and check them out. If you go to my YouTube page, you can watch the video for both of these, and do that. Check it out, and sign up for the Patreon to join our DM Zoom call. Follow us on Twitter at DMZ Show, and we will see you back here in the DMZ next week.
All right. Take care.
See ya.